Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us for our conversation on how digital is reinventing retail. I'm Avani Patel and I will be moderating today's conversation. In my work at the Ember Company, where we ignite big ideas in the consumer industry by providing access to expertise and growth opportunities through our three platforms, the Ember Lab, the Ember Fund, and the Bonfire Group, this conversation on digital and retail has been on the minds of most, if not all of the companies we work with, especially in the midst of the pandemic. The companies we work with range from startups to legacy brands and retailers, and everyone is facing a new reality. Before we dive in, I wanted to thank Hudson and Broad for taking the time to bring us together to talk about this topic. For those of you who don't know Hudson and Broad, you really should get to know them, especially if you're rethinking your retail space. They are experts in visual display with over 30 years of experience. They partner with brands to improve their retail layout, lighting, and virtual merchandising strategy. Hudson and Broad provides digital solutions for a seamless, unique, and memorable shopping experience for your customers in this new world. Speaking of this new world we are living in, I'm very excited to hear what our guests have to share about their new retail experience and digital. Before we get started, I would like to welcome Paul Blum and Aaron Batista, who are both my partners at the Bonfire Group, and Laura Lynn Drury, who has extensive experience in digital, consumer, and D2C brands. I will let our guests get started. So the world has changed tremendously over the past few months, and the way consumers shop has evolved. We have seen customers adopting technology and e-commerce at a much faster pace. As we are reopening retail, we're seeing the need to bridge retail with digital. So from you guys today, we would love to hear your views on how digital is reinventing retail and what's next for the world of retail. And with that, I'm going to kick it off with the first question. And so, Aaron, I'm going to kick this question to you first. And of course, Laura Lynn and Paul, please jump in with your thoughts as well. But Aaron, as retail is opening up slowly, how should brands and retailers think about creating a space where customers feel comfortable returning?
Yeah, thanks. That's a question we're dealing with today. It's actually a question everybody's been dealing with. I think it starts first and foremost with the understanding that the digital world has been affecting retail long before this pandemic. And the influences of digital are now becoming much faster and much more of the forefront. But I want to go back to what I really think is affecting this right now is talent and training. And I think what's really important is for brands to really think about what the teams need, what the consumer's looking for to re-enter a retail environment. And, you know, changing your experience to really include health and safety and a focus on the fears or the concerns that both the teams in store and the consumers are addressing today. So I think it's really important to think about as you're bringing your stores back to life, is that health and safety component, really working through the talent, really retraining. You know, this is the first time that people have to think about hygiene in a different way. They have to think about the kind of cleaning services, and they also need to think about the kind of stories that they're telling, because you need to tell touchless stories as much as possible right now. And I think that all impacts the in-store experience, from visual to branding and marketing, and then also your talent and what stories your talent is able to tell.
So I think that's a good point, Aaron. And I think, Paul, I would love for you to kind of add to that a little bit, as far as, you know, Aaron touched on thinking about touchless, thinking about that customer experience internally. How do you think about creating that in retail these days? Paul, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. I think the only way to actually execute and make that happen is really a complete cultural change in companies today. I think a company, and what I mean by culture is how a company does what it does. So that entails marketing, storytelling, presentation, all of the processes of how a company works has to change dramatically in order to be truly relevant in a hybrid digital physical world. So it's not about adding technology, it's not about adding tools, which you are doing that, but you really have to change the whole way the organization works culturally, how it communicates, what the calendars are, the timeframes of how things work. And then also something I think, Laura Lynn is going to talk a little bit more about, but the tools that are available today are very different than they were 6 months ago in terms of creating that culture change of how things operate. So it's really, I think incrementalism isn't going to work in this environment. When you're opening up, I think it's really important that you go to the very core of the business and the brand and start it off with a whole new set of cultural parameters and operate with those new cultural parameters. And use the tools that are available today, not the tools that were available 6 months ago, because they are much better, they are much more integrated, they are much less expensive. And in our practice, we work with a lot of companies, small startups, that don't have large budgets to do large systems development or systems integrations, or they can't hire a developer. So they have to be very smart in terms of the tools that they choose to execute this new reality. So we advise our clients to be very careful and select the tools that they need from what's relevant today, not what was 6 months ago.
So Laura Lynn, I think, what Aaron and Paul are saying is there needs to be a overall reorganization of how brands and retailers are operating. And Aaron hit on a big point, which is people. And I think the other big point is processes, as Paul was saying. And as you think about people and processes and changing that for today's brands and retailers, what are those tools that are available? How should brands be thinking about that overhaul? Because I think there's a lot from front office to back office that needs to be changed. How would you do that if you're a brand today?
Such a great and difficult question because it takes shape so differently for each company. But the way I'll divide it broadly is your product and operations and your customer. And there are different tools for each, but the operations, that is how you're communicating with each other. What digital platforms are you using? Let's also not forget that the people who are running these digital and retail businesses are now typically scattered. So how are you communicating for efficiency? What tools are you using to make POs, to make sure your team understands these purchase orders, to communicate that with your factory, to have oversight when previously you could send out someone from your team to go to the factory to QA goods. And now that's not as much a possibility, to make sure that those goods then arrive to your warehouse and that your warehouse team knows what to do with it. So really making sure, even without one silver bullet tech tool to rule them all, you have an outline of who is responsible for each step and what does that entail. And documentation there, the old school documentation, I've relied a lot more heavily on the past couple months and over communication. And then there are a lot of different tools to help have oversight for your operations, for your inventory, to make sure you know what is where. And on the operations side as well, as we're thinking of digital and retail, one key bit is you want to build in flexibility. You want to make sure that if e-com takes off, you have the ability to repurpose your previously allocated retail inventory so that it can be sold on e-com, and vice versa for when you need it, but you have one pool of inventory that you can reach into and have it be flexible. On the customer side, consumer insights from day one, it's been really interesting to see the jump in interactions or inquiries from people that are purchasing a lot more and having a lot more interactions and care a lot more about everything they're purchasing. And So knowing when people want to interact, how they're interacting, and what is leading the charge for you. You know, typically the where is my order or Wizmo requests were top of the charts, and now it's changing a little. And previously people might have only wanted to communicate via email, and the explosion of SMS for support as well as sales is really fascinating, something I'm watching closely. You know, Apple's now even leading the charge there, where you can have a text message chat with their support, which is really interesting. But I think constant insights. So on the insight sides for email, using something like Clavio to make sure you're not beating your customers over the head with emails when they haven't opened them in a couple months or they haven't purchased from you in a year, and just being really intelligent about how you're communicating. And like Paul and Aaron said, having, you know, understanding the culture of how they want to be communicated with, what really represents your brand.
So as we dig into that a little bit, you know, the customer insights, the thinking about your customers' happiness, I think, again, there's two ways to think about that. One is what's their experience as they're sitting at home, as they're purchasing. And, you know, we can dig a little bit into that as well, as far as the new business models or the business models that have been emerging out of this pandemic, where, you know, it used to be that retail dominated. People went into shops and they were buying, and, you know, that's where 80% of the traffic was. Now you're seeing new business models emerge. You see curbside pickup, you see, you know, touchless delivery, you're seeing, you know, online shopping, pick up in store, or buy in store, pick up online. As we think about how to make this experience seamless, because it's no longer really about retail and online, it's really about a seamless experience. How are you guys seeing this seamless experience taking place in today's world, in today's retail world? Paul?
Let me just start on that, because I want to sort of add to what Laura Lynn said about how important the data is in this scenario. Because before you create a seamless physical experience, whether it's pick up in store or curbside or any of those things, the core data set has to be aligned at the beginning. Otherwise, you will never have a seamless experience at point of sale. It won't work. And too many companies are trying to sort of backfill it and have this online experience and then a retail experience. And it's going to be very confusing at point of sale unless the data is aligned going in. So what we're doing is we're recommending a lot of our clients really focus on their ESP. Laura Lynn brought up Clavio, which is a great solution. There's also Drip, which is another ESP that's a great one as well. And the database capabilities of these systems are growing weekly. There's another release with both of these companies every week about how to use that data. And there are a lot of new applications that align that data with point of sale in retail. So to me, that's the first step for a brand to create a seamless experience, is alignment of the back-end data so that the customer, you know, everyone uses the word personalization. I use the word confusion. In other words, if you walk into a store and you're not recognized with the history of your purchasing online, you've not created a seamless experience. So it starts with the data integration.
Yeah, I'll use that as an example, Paul. I think that's great. You know, and reopening up some of the brands that we work for, you know, somebody made mention of how excited they were that there were lines outside of a Zara store. Well, the lines outside of the Zara store, if you looked at them closely, everyone there was trying to make a return that they had bought online. So there wasn't anything seamless about it. And the experience itself spoke to what Paul just mentioned, what Laura Lynn was talking about. You need to understand that the digital experience has now built trust and confidence in being able to shop from home in a much more user-friendly way than ever. You have many more people opting to do digital, and where brands and retailers can really help this through is thinking about what that full experience looks like, from the purchase to the return and so forth. So I think all of that needs to be considered as brands are thinking about what their retailing means to the customer today and what they're using that retail store for. Because curbside pickup and so forth, it's still clunky. There's nothing really user-friendly about it. And then the in-store experience of, first and foremost, walking into somebody who's masked and gloved is anti-social relationships that you've been trying for years to build. So I think to Paul's point, understanding the data, understanding who your consumer is, and then building your next retail experience around that information.
And having, Aaron, to build on that, having a cycle so that it's not just one and done, that it's constant iteration. I think it even starts at the point of consideration. One thing that I've been seeing brands doing is using different apps, whether it's a firm or another kind of pay over time, to de-risk the situation. Where previously we were able to tackle that hurdle of trust in person, now we have to get a little bit more creative. So is it a try before you buy? Is it a sample? Is it something where people can experience a portion of the product without feeling as financially committed? And then throughout that journey, using an app potentially like a Returnly, which the analytics for Returnly and the customization available to understand the reasons that people are returning, not only gives you valuable insight into the product, but seeing spikes that you can then address and continue that cycle, and having a process, going back to what I mentioned earlier, with your entire team from product development to sales to wholesale, to make sure you're sharing those insights so they're not siloed. Where I've seen this fail before is when your customer experience team is taking all of this good information in, but not sharing it out, so that you just see the same problems continue to flow through. And especially if you're in a company that has a longer lead time, apparel, you really need to act on those insights almost as soon as they come in with a significant sample size.
So as we're talking about data and customer insights, along the process, along the customer journey, I think there's a lot of different touch points, as you mentioned, Laurelyn, and I think we mentioned a few potential ways. But for those that are listening, I know there's a lot of people in the audience that are thinking about revamping their retail experience, thinking about launching online or vice versa. Can you guys talk a little bit about, from the beginning of the customer journey, from that, point of, whether it's that point of discovery or how they're discovering you through the process of purchase or the process of, going into retail, what are other potential technologies that you think are really beneficial for a brand or a retailer?
Who should start?
I can
Paul,
kick it off.
do you want to start, and then because I also think that ties into store design, and there's a whole conversation to be had on that. So
yes.
Do you want to start with the store design and go from there, Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's important. I've been working with Gensler Architect on a couple of brands, and their approach to reworking the in-store experience, from fixturing to materials used to wayfinding. The truth is you can't have as many people in one area of your store any longer. You don't want to, and it's unsafe. So what Gensler's looking at, and Paul and I have been talking a lot about this, is the guide shop approach to store design, where you're telling your story, you're representing your brand, you're showing new and focusing on categories that are important to that brand, but you're not carrying the level of inventory. You're not creating the kinds of visual experiences that you've done in the past. Paul started by saying you need to really rethink the culture of your brand and what's the story that you want your customer to hear. And then you need to put it into a space that has airflow, that has lighting, that has materials, that has a sense of safety and an environment where people want to shop. Otherwise, you might as well consider yourself a curbside check-in with a digital platform. Right. So if Paul, you want to opine on that, that's what I've been spending a lot of time with these store design architects on, is just what is an experience today. And it's not thinking about post-COVID, because we don't even know what that means. We have to think about what is working and not working today. And there are things that are working and not working, but there's more that's not working.
Yeah, you know, what we're finding is in that process of redesign, there are some real challenges of existing infrastructure. For example, a lot of our clients have various POS systems, but they use Shopify for their online e-commerce. So that's two very different systems. Not all POS systems are well integrated with Shopify. They say they are, but they actually don't share data in the right way to make the experience right. So what we're doing is we're working with a lot of our clients and creating some kind of workaround technologies. A couple of them, one of them is Hero, and another is Endear, which I'll call them pre-transactional databases. I know that's a lot of words, but it's basically before you transact, you can be identified into their store database. That store database is pre-integrated with Shopify. So your Shopify history can be known when you enter one of these technologies at point of sale. So even if the POS system does not recognize you correctly, does not recognize your order history, one of these packages will allow you to have an intelligent experience and a personalized experience. And we're seeing that work for several of our clients. And those aren't the only ones. There's other options as well, but these kind of pre-integrated databases are like quick fixes that we're finding are working right now. I mean, what Aaron said is so important. People are using a technology like Hero right now because their stores are closed. And Hero is allowing their store employees to interact with customers, make online sales, and transact. So now that the store is open, that becomes an even more important step in the journey when the customer walks into that store. You cannot have forgive the word, a stupid experience happen, which is the old, someone walking up who knows nothing about you saying, "Can I help you?" They can't help you because they don't know your order history. They don't know what you own. They don't know all of those things that a e-commerce experience knows about you. So there are some really great tools that are available now to make that happen.
Great. The only things I'll add there is it's no surprise on anyone that labor forces are being reduced and pulled back. So there are systems that can help cross-train folks or make people, when the store is dead because traffic might be down, having them be productive on the e-commerce side, and being able to let people have insight into the different lines of the business. Again, as it is truly now omni-channel, we don't have any other choice. So an example of that, Paul listed a few different CRMs, ERPs, probably some other acronyms in there, I forgot, but having those be really thoughtful, even if it's having HubSpot, a simple integration with HubSpot, which plugs into a variety of different commerce providers, as well as can be used easily in retail to know someone's order history, to allow an in-store associate to be able to send some emails to some e-commerce clients, high-touch e-commerce clients when there's nobody in the store, and being able to dual purpose like that, and even be able to troubleshoot e-commerce orders and answer a few customer emails at the same time. And most platforms are very easily to be trainable on the customer experience side, whether that's Gorgeous, Customer, Zendesk, that can also be leveraged in store. And same with insight into inventory. Could they be doing an inventory check with a seamless system that integrates back into Shopify? So now the e-commerce site can show that they can get out same day delivery to that neighborhood because they have certain shirts in stock in the store, and being able to offer even more services because they're cross-trained.
And I think, Laura, into that, and to Paul, it's redefining what a salesperson is. What is an in-store role today? And, it used to be that you would, hire your team and train your team on the products coming in and be done. And those days are done. And I think the people that need to be in store I'm working with the Bowerman Group right now on a search for one of the brands that we work with. And what we talk a lot about is, what are the training needs for this new retail experience? Who are we looking for? Who are going to be the retail in-store leaders that are going to be able to process, as Paul and Orlin were talking, the data, and then being able to engage that customer in a physical space.
And just to tie it all together, what we all said at the beginning, these applications are not expensive. They're easy to use, easy to implement. It's just a matter of selecting or use the word curating the right set of these applications. We have a whole area of Bonfire that is just the curation of a whole set of applications that are best of breed, work really well, fully integrated, and are easy to use. So I think it's an important initiative for anyone restarting in this environment.
Yeah, and Paul, this might be pedantic, but even to jump on that point, when you hear the word or the term ESP, email service provider, it's terrifying. And then you actually get to see the back end of a clavio.
Right.
And it still is kind of terrifying until you get a training and you realize how powerful and easy to use it is. It's easy enough where you can drag and drop images and text and have a really wonderful conditional email to only send to people who have purchased a certain pair of shorts from the e-commerce store in the last 3 months, but hadn't purchased the prior 9. Something like that. And you can test different subject lines. So someone who's a non-engineer, non-graphic designer, mere mortal like myself can send some really thoughtful, really robust emails that you're getting so many learnings from.
Laura Lynn, I have a confession to make. I do a clavio training once a month.
Really? I'm joining the next one.
Yeah, I just go to the training when a client implements it, because you learn so much, and it's constantly
It's incredible.
Changing.
It is, and in no way, Clavio is not sponsoring this, but it's a great tool.
Yeah.
Their trainings are incredible, and they are pulling out so much. One of the great things, new features I love, is the forms.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've played with those, Paul.
Yeah.
But the ability, especially now, to have a form pop up, some of those annoying ones that you see, but you can ask a different question of like, how are you feeling today? Or, what's your favorite color? So you can use it for product development, for customer engagement, for email capture, or just for fun.
Yeah, I find that way less obtrusive than SMS. So I'm a big forums fan. I think that personally, I hope that takes over rather than too much SMS, but that's just my own personal.
I'm holding out for SMS. Dirty Lemon in the early days really got me on that train, and now I'm a sucker for it. I purchase, it's probably a really good hit rate. So any brands out there, feel free to send me a text. There's probably a 30% chance I'll purchase.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
So I think a lot of this conversation it's been centered around data and what brands and retailers are doing and what they need to be doing. But at the end of the day, all of this is really about customer and customer happiness. And I think, Aaron, you hit on this earlier with the Zara lines and what's that experience like for your customer. And so you can be doing all of these things. You can be, you may know all of their search history, but how do you think about collecting customer feedback and customer happiness and iterating on that? Because you can use all of these service providers, you can use an ESP, you can use all of that, but if you're not doing what's making the customer happy, you're going to have to change something. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, Vani, I think that's a great point. And I also think what retail is doing right now to reopen their stores is a short-term Band-Aid, and not even a good short-term Band-Aid. And it's really understanding what your consumers feeling and thinking about being out in public and being in your stores. And, working with some of the folks that we work with, like IVAI, that creates, chatbots and social listening platforms. I think you really need to be able to listen to what's happening with the consumer shopping you digitally, and then with the consumer shopping you at retail, and being able to bring best practices to that. There's also, Avani, we were talking earlier about Surf Wax and streamlining your operations and groups like that, that you really need to look at what you're offering your consumer. And it's actually less people, but being able to do more and being able to offer more. And if you think about that, then it changes the whole retail dynamic, where you don't have to deal so much with masks and gloves and a plexiglass shield. As Paul was saying, you actually know more about your customer before they even come to you. And that relationship builds strength and confidence over time in a much different way than we've been retailing in the past.
Laura, Lynn, Paul, do you guys have anything to add on the customer happiness viewpoint?
Yeah, you can't fix what you don't measure. I think this was established as a foothold for me at Warby Parker, where customer insights led everything from product development and doing surveys to see what gained traction with customers, to actually testing and learning every piece, including customer happiness. Just to give a little bit of insights, everything we did at Warby was tested. The very first retail pop-up was tested, and only when we deemed that a success with predetermined metrics did we then push on to do another store, and we rinsed and repeated. So I think consumer insights leads, and there are a lot of great plugins for NPS, Net Promoter Score, also called CSAT, free ones, paid ones. If you search your app store, or ask Avani, Paul, or Aaron if you'd like some other recommendations. But measuring that, and not just measuring that in a silo, but comparing it against what you're doing in your business to understand what's hitting, to understand it, and getting more context, not just getting the ranking, but are people giving you low scores because of how long it's taking for them to receive their goods? And is that out of your control because of all of our, all the carriers right now are taking a little bit more time? Maybe communicating upfront about that and putting something on the checkout page saying, hey, because of this crazy time we're in, it might take a little longer. Let us know if that's bothering you and we can try to expedite it. So there are a variety of ways to be able to troubleshoot, but only when you have that insight can you see. So that was a little bit of a ramble, but really measure with CSAT, NPS to see what trends there are against what you're doing as a business.
Just to tie it together and to end it, that's what we mean by culture. In other words, how a company operates in terms of being sensitive to making the customer truly happy only will happen with the right data analysis and reaction to that data. Traditional companies don't operate on that data. They maybe use it, maybe they'll have a quarterly meeting to recap what the data is showing, but that is not going to work. The clients we have that are digitally native, like Warby, are built on reacting to customer data. And that's the most significant cultural change that we see that has to happen to be successful.
So as we're thinking about customer data, I'm going to ask each one of you to share, what do you think is and I know there's not just one answer, but if I'm a brand or a retailer right now, whether I'm a small brand and retailer who's just thinking about going from retail to online, I'm a small brand or retailer thinking about capturing data for the first time, or I'm a large legacy retailer and I have data, what is the most important tool or way to get started if you were going to do one big implementation? Or what would you start with to do the implementation, and then where would you go from there? Paul, I will start with you.
I had a feeling you were going to ask that question. I would start, as I think I said it earlier, I would start with the ESP, the email service provider. By the way, I think Drip is also a great option as well. I didn't want to make Clavio too happy. But I think going to a cutting edge email service provider gives you that first step of understanding how data can be used and how to communicate with a segmented list and starting to create workflows and campaigns that are relevant to that list. I think that, in my opinion, is not my opinion, that's what we've been doing with our clients And it's a good training ground of step one. And then going on from there, how does that work with the rest of the experience? But starting there, if you don't have a really strong database initiative around your emails, I think that that's your base, in my opinion.
I might say start with, I think an audit is also great. If you don't know what you're fixing, you're not going to be able to fix it well. So one idea for how to do that is start with the old school cycle: awareness, engagement, get them to purchase and then retain them. So awareness, are you not getting people to your site? Then that might be a paid media problem. Are you getting them to the site, but they're not converting? Then it's a conversion rate problem, and you're going to have to bring in Optimizely potentially, or maybe even some more graphics, a little bit more of a live site. Optimizely, and for any of you that don't know, it's a tool to test different copy, images, functionality on your site. So you might want to test, would our conversion rate be better if our add to cart was bright blue? Would our conversion rate be better if we had a quiz to help people find their perfect product? Would our conversion rate be better if we had incorporated some kind of try before you buy? So doing something like that on site to improve your conversion. If people aren't coming back and repurchasing and your product is something that is relevant to be repurchased, maybe it is something to do with engagement and the way you're reaching out to people through your ESP. So I'd first do an audit to see what's going on, because we could all spin our wheels with all the fun tools and tech out there to optimize businesses, but to really help you focus, because I'm sure all the folks that have joined have a lot on their plates right now. And for that audit, anyone on this panel right now, I'm sure would be happy to point you in the right direction. I know Ember and Bonfire, they have a ton of resources for helping with an audit like this.
Aaron?
Yeah, and I think to round it out, to me, it's about the culture and the people. And Paul and Laura Lynn were talking about this, is if you're a digitally native brand and you want to go into retail, or if you're a retailer and all of a sudden your digital has picked up, you can't think of them as separate channels anymore. You actually need to behave as digital forward and retail to support it. And we're finding a lot of brands, even traditional brands, and Paul was talking about some of our clients that are seeing for the first time in their brand history, the importance of digital and strengthening their overall reach to the consumer. So it's not about thinking differently about digital and retail. It's about thinking collectively about digital and retail, and bringing some of these applications, bringing together this technology, looking at both your web platform and your POS, as Paul mentioned earlier, and making sure that they're able to talk to each other through your teams and then to the customer in a way that isn't clunky, that isn't old school, and that isn't temporary.
I just want to highlight something that Laura Lynn said, which is really interesting. She brought up content being an important part of this. It's important not to get too, focused only on the data and only on the applications. There are ways of looking at your content and seeing if it's relevant, if it's working, if it's engaging. And that's something that a lot of clients don't want to deal with when they deal with technology. And we're seeing it as an emerging issue with new clients that we're talking to. Is their content relevant now, post-COVID? Is it the right content to be deploying?
Got it. And so for you guys, I think as we move away from data into content and into employees and people, and as we think about going in store and going online, what does, and Aaron, I'll start with you for this one, what does the new in-store experience look like?
Well, if you looked at it today, you might as well be going to either your dentist or having your kidneys removed. It's not pretty. I think the new experience actually needs to be empathetic to the people in store, the people working in the store, and then the consumer. And I think if you've reopened your stores, then as the leaders of your brand, you need to go visit them and see what your customers seeing and see what your employees going through right now. It's awkward. It's a bit uncomfortable, and people are making it up as they go. I think one of the things that I was really disappointed in our industry is we didn't come together as a group collective to find a way to ensure both the employee and the consumer that we had a consistent approach to reopening our businesses. You find that in the hospitality industry, in the airline industry, every brand is going it alone. And at Bonfire and Ember, Paul and the team and I have been really focused on one consistent approach and message that that addresses, federal regulations, state regulations, and then brand capabilities. So it's looking at what kind of story can you tell in your environment today that keeps your people safe and keeps your customers safe and wanting to be in that store.
Yeah, and also has the bandwidth and flexibility to change as soon as all of that changes, which will be tomorrow.
It's been changing every week, and
yeah,
and moving dates on people, and the threat of closing up again. All of those things are active in this moment, and it's making it very challenged. So it's having that empathy for these stores as they reopen.
Paul, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, knowing that your strong suit is online and digital. So it's slightly different, but we'll tie it all together with you, Laura Lynn. Paul, so as you think about an online experience in this new age, right, I think that's also had to change over time because of everything that's going on. What does that new online experience look like, or what's the ideal online experience for today's brands and retailers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think this is really just happening today. So it's a really good question, Avani. I think that there is a flood, or I know there's a flood of brands moving online. Huge amounts of revenue have shifted from store to online. So those businesses and brands have to invest in getting attention, driving traffic, new customer acquisition, all the things that they do to drive revenue. So what I think is going to happen is the online experience is going to get overcrowded. It's going to get busy. It's going to get confusing. Amazon is getting so big, and they have so many different programs and brands and product categories that it is going to be overwhelming. So what we're advising our brands is to first make sure your content, and when I mean content is how you're communicating with your customer, what your images look like, what your emails say, what your organic posts are, what your social ads are. All of that content has to be reassessed and really made to be a guide to your customers. And that's really what a brand is. When things start to get overwhelming and overcrowded, a good brand acts as a guide and a trusted guide to their consumer. So it's really establishing that trust and being really careful and intelligent about the kind of content you deploy and how you deploy it. So it's kind of like this quiet confidence and trust that you build with the customer that we think is going to win in this very soon to be overcrowded e-com environment. I mean, what's really funny is I know I've spent the last several years focusing on digital and online. Now, partly because of Aaron, but in general, we're starting to look at some really interesting brick and mortar experiences now, where everyone else is piling into online. We're looking at some really interesting and new and fresh ideas in the brick and mortar world as a form of customer acquisition, as a form of engagement. but not in the old way, not just driving revenue. It's really about engagement. So that's kind of where I see it. I know I answered your question by doing it a different way, but I just think that the online business is the core. It's the execution of the customer service. But I think these other areas of engagement and new customer acquisition are what we're finding interesting today.
Laura Lynn, I'm going to have you talk about bridging the two. I think, we've gotten some great points from Aaron and Paul. And how do you think about bridging the retail plus the online experience for your customers?
Yeah, I might underscore some of what I've said, but I think it is building in flexibility and redundancy into your supply chain, into your people, and into your system. So supply chain, whether our world is wholesale is going to pick back up, or retail, making sure your inventory can be used most effectively depending on which is heating up for you. And that changes from business to business. And supply chain, things are also changing overseas. If you have products that you're getting from a place where it's getting harder and harder to import from, thinking about where you can diversify and build redundancy into your supply chain, and just try to control whatever you can without knowing what other changes are coming our way. When it comes to the operations and the systems, like Paul and Aaron said, make sure your systems all talk to each other. Make sure your data in is clean, because garbage in is garbage out. And make sure you have an idea of how to analyze it and have a process internally for making sure you're constantly looking at it. It could be every week or every month, but definitely don't let it be every quarter or every 6 months. That's too slow. And then your people, cross-training them, make sure they can contribute to any side of your business, whether that's wholesale, retail, e-com, whether that's an operations associate helping get orders through the warehouse, or it's a customer-facing associate who can get on the phone or be in the store with someone. So I think that, to go back to the beginning, it's all about building in redundancy and flexibility in your entire business.
Yeah, and can I just touch on that, Laura Lynn, because I think that's great. We're going to have a tendency right now to blame all of retail's woes on this pandemic. And there were woes long before COVID-19 in this system. And that's where Paul and I have been really working as a team to figure out, what does retail look like? What's the future of retailing all about? It's an amazing industry. It's great to be a part of it, but it has been struggling at store level for quite some time. So the abilities now to rethink, how do you bridge your channels, and how do you make your digital and your retail more aligned to your brand messaging and more engaging to your consumer? That's what's interesting. That's where I think the bonfire spark is right now, if you will, is, a lot of these things were happening pre-COVID. They just sped up. And that sense of urgency now is why we're getting a lot of calls about, wow, I can't believe how great my digital business is. How do I sustain it? How do I improve it? And a lot of the software technologies that we've been talking about are ways to do that. But you also have to change the culture of your company. And as Laura Lynn talked about, you have to cross-train talent. You have to have people really understand what digital means to the brand if you've been a traditional retailer.
Great. And I know we could spend all day talking about this. Unfortunately, we only have an hour today, and we're down to the last 10 minutes. And as many questions as I still have left, I'm sure the audience has very specific questions for all of you guys. So I'm gonna actually end my questions here and now pick up the audience's questions, if that's okay with everybody. The first question that came in is there one retail segment that you see that has an advantage in creating alignment with new customer experience? Is it luxury? Is it digital natives? Who do you think actually has a leg up? And I will leave it to any of you to feel free.
Yeah, I would say, personally, I think it's digitally native. I think I've discovered a lot of really fun and exciting brands through the 4 months that I've not been shopping in retail stores. I've been introduced to a lot of brands. Matt, who is also a partner in Bonfire, has introduced me to some really great brands. You know, both apparel, health and wellness, I think are important. It sits, you know, a lot of them sit in, you know, in luxury to a degree, but I think, you know, a brand that just comes to mind that I just want to tout because I'm so excited about it is just Mad Happy. And it's a brand that has a message. And I found that message online, which is, you know, mental health awareness and understanding the importance of that, along with really great products, really great knitwear. So I do think digitally native brands have a leg up at the moment. I don't know if anyone else wants to interject.
I agree, 100%.
One other flavor there. I read an article the other day by Laura Chow talking about how inclusive cults are the new exclusive cults. I don't know, Aaron, you're smiling and nodding. I think you might have seen that same thing. But
Yeah.
I think anything that's building that sense of community, whether it's a fitness brand like Peloton, which people are going bananas for, and there's like a 3-month wait time to get it, or any other brands that are building a sense of community around their product, around their goal, around their mission, is going to be something that I think is going to be more deeply engaging.
Got it. And actually that's good, unless Paul, do you have something to add?
No.
And that's actually a good segue into our second question, which there was, prior to the pandemic, there was a strong digital native move to brick and mortar. Do you still think that's a good thing to do? Do you think it's still necessary? Because a lot of digital brands were finding it necessary to move into brick and mortar. As we mentioned early on in the conversation, before the pandemic, most of the shopping, a majority of the shopping was taking place in store.
I'll take that one if that's all right. I mean, what we're advising our customers, our clients that are digitally native, that have some stores or have a lot of stores or no stores, they have to look at brick and mortar as a marketing tool or a customer acquisition tool or a way to engage with customers, with metrics, with the ability to track the results of that progress. So when you look at it that way, I think it makes a lot of sense for digitally native brands to intelligently and carefully expand into retail in a smart way, in the way they know how with their data focus. I've seen some brands, digitally native brands, turn into retail brands or act like traditional retail brands when they go into retail. I'm not sure how they do it. I guess they hire people who supposedly have retail expertise and listen to them, and then they create a problem for themselves by going into that path in the traditional retail way. So if you stay true to the basic tenet of a digitally native brand and go into brick and mortar with that philosophy of a strong return on ROI or ROAS in terms of what you do, and you create those right metrics and stick with that, I think it's a very intelligent strategy.
Yeah, I would agree to that, Paul. And I also think, you know, retail was all of a sudden realizing how important experiential retailing is. And I do think it's still very critical for a digital brand to be able to tell its story. I think to Paul's point, that story may not necessarily just need to be a financial one. It's a customer acquisition. It's the ability to reach new audiences. And it's an ability for the brand to express itself in a 3-dimensional way. So I agree. I think it's important that the brand knows itself well enough to know that if it is going to come to retail, that it's able to execute it well.
And as a final question here, unless anybody in the audience has any more questions, who do you think's been a leader in opening up and, you know, doing something different post-pandemic?
A lot of what's coming to my mind is digital, because for the majority of the pandemic, retailers have been closed. I think from the digital side, what's been really interesting is companies that have been able to speed up their tech innovation pipeline. So if you look at someone like a Row, who has pushed out, so Row and Rory, the companies that offer medication for hair loss and erectile dysfunction, they've pushed out telemedicine as a way to say like, hey, we know this field, let's offer something that's topical. And they were able to expedite their timeline by like a year. I know Nike's done something similar. So I think a lot of the tech companies that have been able to speed up their tech pipelines to offer services and apps that are relevant and helpful to people during quarantine has been really impressive. And I might ask Paul or Aaron to jump in with retailers. Besides the New York City restaurants, and restaurants in general have just been amazing at how they've been able to pivot, but haven't been out shopping.
Yeah, I think that's just it, right? A lot of retailers haven't been able to express themselves through this. But, you know, brands that I think are doing good or thinking about what they're doing, you know, like Soul Guard, which is a really interesting travel brand. Neighborhood Goods comes to mind as a brand that's actually interesting right now in the approach. You know, I had mentioned Mad Happy. I think, you know, brands like Huckberry and Imogene and Willie, and brands that are digitally native but thinking about coming to retail or have shown up at retail to tell a story, I think those are the brands that are doing really well. I think the larger legacy brands, it's actually hard to find a leader right now in them, in their approach to reopening. You know, Zara, I will just, sorry, Paul, just say Zara, you know, made note a while back that they're going to close 1,200 of their retail stores to use those dollars to reinvest in their digital platform. So that's an interesting take on a brand like Zara that's a vertical retailer.
Yeah, one of the people that we were impressed with, we met with a company, Credo Beauty. They've been using Hero through the whole pandemic with store associates to keep their business going. And now that they're opening, those store associates have the ability to invite those clients into the store in the right way. So I think that's a great example of a digital application applied to reopening of retail in an intelligent way.
Great. Actually, one last question came in. How important is social engagement, value set to success, and how is this measured?
That's an interesting question. It is really hard to create a metric for social engagement. All I can say is, though, through the pandemic, all of our clients had really strong increases in social engagement, and that correlated to high online sales. So I think that's a really good question, whoever asked it. And it's, we're in the process of kind of looking at some new metrics. And I think that a metric has to be developed for social engagement and how that relates to sales now that online is a bigger percentage. So I think that's a good question. I don't have a good answer for it, but it's a good question. Maybe Laura Lynn has a good answer, better answer.
Yeah, with Murphy's Law, my internet's dropping in and out, so I heard part of that question, but I think I know enough of what it was. I think, Paul, I agree with what you said there. I think it's so hard to measure the intangibles that people talk about, like engagement and impressions. I even sometimes struggle with paid marketing ads that are just for awareness, because the purpose of awareness is to drive sales. So at the end of the day, I think it really just, you look at the funnel of how many people are getting to your site and then how many people are converting and purchasing and what that average order value is. And I think you can tie that back with however they got there, whether it's social, SEO, from a podcast, anything like that. It should all be, in my opinion, tied back to sales.
I've just been impressed with the uptick in social posting, organic social. I think the clients that have used it well have done really well. So I think that it's been an interesting experience with that.
Because it does go to what I said earlier, building community, especially, I mean, there's so many features now for for polls, for going live, which luckily has slowed down. I'm sure for all of us here in the beginning of the pandemic, seems like every brand was going live with just like 3 followers, which was funny to see. I don't know how many sales that drove, but I think if you're using the tools really well and engaging and being thoughtful and knowing when people want content and knowing when it's best just to be quiet and give the spotlight to other movements, other ideas, it kind of ties it all together of it's really important to know your customers, know your team, know when it's time to speak and grab info and when it's time to just be quiet.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for being here on the panel today. Paul, Laurelyn, Aaron, I think we all learned a lot. I think there's a lot of focus on customer, a lot of focus on data that needs to happen for brands and retailers to really be able to bridge this gap. And there are a lot of digital tools out there which, you know, Aaron, Paul, or Laurelyn can recommend. If anybody would like any recommendations, please reach out to us as well. And I think, like I said, there's a lot more we can say about this topic. Unfortunately, our hour is up. Hudson Broad, we want to thank you again for hosting this panel. And thank you, panelists, for being here. And thank you to
Thank you, Avani. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.